Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I've been really looking forward to this, and it's just completely ironic that you're in the middle of a transition with a different role with us, but a little bit of a different role. So tell people who you are, what your name is, briefly what your background is, maybe what your training is, and what you've been doing, what your job has been at Cumberland Heights, and for how long.
Yeah. So my name is Jason Stiletto. I'm a licensed alcohol drug abuse counselor in the state of Tennessee. I'm also in recovery from alcohol and other substances. And I basically, I got my foot in the door into treatment after working my own program of recovery. I fell in love with helping people as a sponsor. And while in my my early stage of recovery, housing was an issue. So I went to a sober living, and I was one of their better clients. I did what I was told, and I was working my program of recovery really well, and the owners liked that. And so they offered me a job in house management. And that was kind of like my first supervisory role in treatment as a house manager. And that was a learning experience. Had some hard times, had to deal with some deaths in the house, which is unfortunately something that happens. But I also was able to help some guys out. And so I talked with my sponsor and I said, I think I like this. I think I want to change my career path.
Right.
And so he says, well, what do you need to do? And I said, I think I'm going to just look into it some more. He's like, good idea. Do some research. And I found a place where I could pay to get certified as a certified alcohol drug abuse counselor. And that's where I started. Went to school, got my specialty hours needed, worked in IOP, and kind of just started clocking hours. Got my KDAC. I passed the ICRC. And then long story short, found the woman that I absolutely love. I'm in the Married Up Club, and COVID happened, and we had a kid, and so things just kind of quickly moved on. And when we had our daughter, Kyler, she was about 6 months old, and we wanted to make a change. And so she has some family out in Tennessee, and one day I just said, I think we need to move to Tennessee. So we started looking, and God has provided us a path. And while we were selling our house, I found a place called Cumberland Heights that I'd never heard of. And there was a spot open. And so I applied and I got it. And so before we moved out here, we had a house. We both had jobs. And there was no obstacles. It was seamless. And so been working here ever since. I transitioned my certification to a licensure, and started off as a float counselor in the men's department, working in all different departments, and been a primary counselor for about 4.5 years now. And so it's been.
What's that like? Like, what, for somebody that has no idea what happens in residential care or what it's about day to day, what's it like? What time do you get here? When you hit your space bar, like, what are you doing?
It is a full day. Having wasted a lot of time in my disease, I use the best of my time. So I wake up really early. Self-care is very important to me. So I wake up at about 4. I go to the gym, and then I live in Spring Hill. And so I have to leave there at the perfect time, because if you don't leave Spring Hill early enough, you're stuck on that 31.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I'm out the door by 6:30. I get here about 7:30-ish on a good day. On other days, I'm here at 8. And then it's running and gunning until about 3:30. And that's my window to go home, because once again, there's more traffic. So primary group is the patient's one of their favorite things. It's an everyday group where the counselor's caseload all meets together. And that's where the intense insight comes. Feedback, sharing challenges on campus, off campus. And then we get to work individually with clients. So when we have a full caseload, it's usually, for me, it's a 9 a.m. session before primary group. And then after lunch, it's another 1 o'clock session. And then the remaining times, filling the day is all documentation. You also have to be available for crisis management, because that stuff happens too. So you have to be very flexible, which can be hard at times for somebody that's very, disciplined in their structure, but patients come first.
So Jason, what do you think 4.5 years in this role, what's the goal for somebody that's in your group? What do you think the goal is for this period of treatment?
For a counselor?
No, for a patient.
For a patient? Stabilization. That's pretty much as you're, I mean, I don't want to discredit the first 30 days,
No doubt.
but detox is detox. Detox is the physical aspect. The remainder of the 30 days is clearing the cobwebs out of the noggin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's really being aware of what your emotions are. It's finding out, who am I? Now that the substances aren't here, how do I deal? Like right now, I got several clients that are sick for the first time in recovery. And they've been so used to being sick and intoxicated, they haven't never felt the pain of being sick. So being sick for the first time in recovery is awful because you feel everything. And so it's like you feel like you're dying, and it's like, no, you just have allergies. Mm-hmm. That's what this feels like. So welcome. This is what everybody's going through right now. So it's more of, depending on the client's willingness, the counselor's main objective is to find a pathway to support them moving forward in the other underlying symptoms that might cause the substance use. Because it's not always a family predisposition. It can be trauma, too much love, not enough, so abuse or neglect. Sexual trauma. It could be other forms of trauma. It could be mental health. And a lot of people don't realize it. It's like, I have a drinking problem. Well, no, you also cope with anxiety by drinking. Or you have an adverse childhood experience that you never really looked at. And that's something that's reoccurring, and you're not aware of that. So it's helping them better understand their life, and then maybe other avenues to support their recovery. Because if it's not a big picture thing, we're only really dealing with one problem. So
how does the milieu shift your treatment goals for patients? Like I'm curious. So I'm a recovering therapist myself. I used to work in treatment in terms of being patient facing. And of course, I don't do that anymore. And it's been some time, 8 years since I've been patient facing in a treatment setting. And I'm curious your strategy, your insight over those 8 years, which is different than the years before that. Culture changes, trends shift. Like, I'm curious about, from a residential perspective, are you allowed to push and pull and mold based on the milieu that you have in your group? Or are you trying to set a similar homeostatic change process no matter what? Or are you just taking it as it comes?
You just have to take it as it comes.
Yeah.
If I go into a group setting with an expectation, they're going to feel it. If I come out with an agenda.
Interesting.
You might have an idea of, okay, so-and-so is supposed to do their step 1 today. So hopefully we get to that.
Right.
But then once you sit them all down, you have them check in, and you do a self-assessment of their anxiety, their cravings, their depression, all those things, and find out how their internals are doing. That's not something I typically have them share in group. I think it's a little more intimate I think they're more honest when they don't share it. So it's something they know they can provide it to me. But then they start sharing about problems, and then a whole day could be just problem solving. And so that idea of what you were planning is going to go out the window. Let's
have this huge psychotherapy group and get down to the core of whatever. It's like, forget about it.
It's truly client-centered.
Super interesting. And you have to, it reminds me a little bit of experience in when I was in graduate school, like being exposed to adolescent care. And I always had to be really careful with pace. Like being in recovery, I was always wanting to, this is going to sound harsh, but I don't mean it that way. But I was always wanting to push into vulnerability or I'm an EFT therapist by passion, and so I was always trying to identify what's the process underneath the content. Right? Content of the day, the content, and what's happening underneath that might be a recurring frustration with my partner or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you do treatment with adolescents, and you need to slow down. They're at a different developmental. And a lot of people talk about addiction treatment from a developmental lens, in the sense that, people that have been drinking and drugging for 20 years, are at a different, on average, developmental stage
Yes.
than their peers at the same age.
Yes.
And I find I can see what your day-to-day might feel like in terms of just allowing people to be where they are, literally.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that, because I was actually just having an interaction with the client, and their whole life has been basically a constant fight or flight stress response. And so from childhood, and they were in law enforcement, and so they were constantly under pressure. Hardly any good interactions. They get here and they're like, okay, so what's next? I'm like, calm.
Right.
It's okay, now you can slow down. You're not running from it. Now we're going to take care of you. So there is that. There's a good time there's times where you do need to push a client a little bit, and there's times when you need to tell the patient to kind of like pump the brakes.
Yeah. So it's about to shift for you a little bit.
Yes.
So tell people what you're doing next.
So once again, I'm a big spiritual guy, and God has just been so good to me. I'm very blessed for the lifestyle I get to live. Like I said before, I've been with Cumberland for about almost 5 years. River Road had been my main focus, and I started going to school at Hazelden Betty Ford, graduate school. And so
shout out.
School, work, father, husband, my bandwidth is full. And to be honest, I've been waiting for this spot to open up.
Mm-hmm.
I've been waiting for a long time. And I always just knew that if I did the right thing, the door opened when it's supposed to happen. And I just can't point to anything else other than God working in my life, that this opportunity opened up now. We've had some really great times here at Cumberland, have had some stressful times here at Cumberland.
Certainly have.
But this new opportunity, I think, is going to be great for me, not only as a professional, but as a Cumberland Heights employee. Because part of the reason why I'm doing Hazelden and Betty Ford is to enlarge my scope of practice. Because right now, my scope is addiction. And once I get my master's degree, and once I pass the NCE and get my LPC and then my MHSP, that opens the whole door to other practices, and my skill set changes.
Mm-hmm.
My long-term goal is to help more people, but I think my even longer term goal is to get my foot in the door for leadership, to help other counselors help more clients. So right now I'm learning more about the IOP side within Cumberland Heights. So that's going to, I think, kind of help me see the big picture and how it works. I know what it's like to send people from residential to EC or residential to IOP, but now, on the receiving end of IOP, working with the different, they're coming in already established, or they should be already established as far as detox wise. They've had, usually come through residential, they've had 30 days of stabilization period.
Right.
Sometimes not.
Right.
And it's not foreign to me because I did work in IOP.
Right.
So I'm excited for this opportunity that the hours fit my schedule more. It's closer to home.
Oh man.
It allows me more time with the family.
How much closer? Like significant?
Well, 50 miles right now to River Road. 19 miles to Cool Springs.
That's just,
it's
math.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jason's going to our Cool Springs
AM.
Brentwood.
Yep.
IOP location, which is a great location.
Beautiful location. Great office.
And I think, is Sarah still in there too?
Sarah, yeah. She's my director, and she's right next door, which
Perfect.
is great. I love Sarah.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
Yeah. So I think that I love when those opportunities, those God moments come in where there's like, the need in the organization and it happens to fit the individual's goals.
Yeah.
And like when we can hit that nexus, it's just perfect.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a natural question for me to ask because you've been doing the 4.5 years, very patient-centered, firefighting, stabilization, and how can we remove barriers for engagement? And now you're going to be on the other side, or really the next step of engagement, and ideally trying to support somebody who might be in your care at the IOP level of care, from like 2, 3, 4 months.
Yes.
I mean, hopefully we can really, help somebody. So from detox to end of IOP, we're talking about 4-ish months of engagement in professional services that are really absolutely needed.
Yeah.
And so I'm also excited for you to be a bridge.
Yes.
You know, like we don't know what we don't know. And it's a good thing to have cross-pollination and fresh ideas and iteration, you know?
Absolutely.
So I have no doubt that you're going to get in there and say, you know, wait a minute, what if we connected this dot to this one, you know, that type of thing. So
the missing little links the nuances that we don't know because we don't know.
Yeah. And Sarah's great.
Yeah.
You know, I've always just been impressed by her and her presence and her practice, and it's just totally natural too. She's been in that location for a while.
Yeah.
So what do you think it's going to be next Monday? So we're recording this, today's Thursday. So your last day here,
on campus tomorrow. Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we scheduled this whenever we did. Yes. I didn't know that this was all gonna, so it's kind of an emotional week.
It's been very emotional. Yeah. There's, I love the people here.
Yeah.
The growth that I've made here.
Yeah.
It's been huge.
Yeah.
The fighting, you know, we fight for our clients, and, you know, we don't treat our clients. That's the thing. It's funny because I was asked to also write my bio for the website today. And so I'm like, oh gosh, I'm doing everything all at once this week. This is terrible. It's also great.
Yeah.
You know, when I went through treatment, I went through a place called Solmar, and it's in a Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach, California. And it's one of the best ones in the nation. It's literally Cumberland Heights if it was on the coast. And I know there's a lot of bad treatment centers out in California, but this is like a legit place. And when I work here, I see the heart and I see the care that the staff has for the clients. And I see what they do day in and day out. And it's encouraging and it's motivating. And it just makes you want to try even harder. And so it's going to be, you know, it's a hard transition, but it's needed, because I use the metaphor of like, I've got a fellowship plant in my office right now, and it's about time for it to be replanted. And right now I'm that plant. In order for me to grow more, I need to be repotted. And that's what this is. And it's all happening at once. And so I see this podcast, which was scheduled like a month. I didn't know this was going to happen tomorrow. It just so happened. I had the IOP team meeting yesterday. Like,
oh yeah,
everything in my recovery has been just seamless. And so that's why I know
that quiet surety.
Yeah. No roadblocks, no fighting.
And then you just say, okay,
let's
take me where I'm supposed to be.
Yep.
You know, and allow me to do this work, allow me to do your will. And separately, but also connected, I am so excited that you're in the Hazelden Betty Ford graduate program.
Yeah.
I think and I'm really proud that we have a crew.
Yes.
That's in there.
Yeah.
And in fact, we've gotten feedback from some of our peers from Hazelden Betty Ford leadership, just that, you know, the crew of Cumberland Heights staff that are there are some of the best students in the program. And so I take some pride in being like, yeah,
absolutely.
You know, not that there's any sort of competition, but I just know that y'all are in there, not only impacting.
There is competition.
I'm sure there is. But not only that y'all are in there and having your own, because education changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, when I went back, I had failed in school. I don't know if we've never talked about this. And I failed in school, and I was a young person in recovery, you know, and through my addiction. And so I had a lot of shame, you know, restarting and already with the shame of being kind of in recovery. So I'm just dealing with all this identity about you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff. But,
yes.
you know, God led me into a collegiate recovery program in Lubbock, Texas, Texas Tech. God led you into this graduate program connected to Hazelden Betty Ford with some of your peers. And so I was in a community, similar to that in the sense that I was in school with other people that are in recovery, and it taught me a lot about recovery, about how to show up early, about how to stay. I'll never forget, like when I showed up to campus, I'll tell you this. When I showed up to Texas Tech, like doing like orientation.
Oh yeah.
And they like hand you like the obligatory like Hanes t-shirt, that's like 100% cotton that'll like cut your skin.
Yeah.
They're like, here you
Totally
go.
itchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they give you like the bag with all the inserts and like the Texas Tech pen or whatever. And you're in this auditorium and everybody there. I mean, it's such an alcoholic thing. I was there with people in recovery, but I remember feeling so different, just still struggling with that identity because I perceived everybody being 18, and I was 21, by the way. So it's not, relax, Nick, it wasn't that serious of a
little harder.
But, and I remember calling my sponsor like the first day of classes because I just had all this evidence of failure.
Yeah.
And I remember I was like, I have no idea. His name was Luis in Texas. I was like, I have no idea what to do. He was like, what do you mean? And I was like, what do you mean? What do I mean? Like, I'm not calling. Tell me what to do, And he said, well, why don't you follow the suggestions of recovery and apply them in school? And I was like, give me this crap, And he said, well, look, if you show up early, stay late, sit close to the front, ask for help, take notes, and at the end, they're going to give you this document your first day of every class. And he's like, if you do everything that document says to do when it says to do it, you'll get straight A's. He's like, it's called the syllabus, and that was my experience. Sit close to the front, ask for help, and just take advantage of it. So that taught me how to be a team member.
Yeah.
It taught me how to collaborate, how to have difficult conversations with a group mate who might not be pulling their weight on a project, and how can I address that in a way? You know what I mean? It started to, meanwhile, you're learning about therapy. You're reading about the etiology or the root of this different types of models and ways of thinking. And so I'm excited for you, Jason, because it'll change your life too.
Yeah.
And God will probably take you in a direction that you don't expect. Yeah.
Yeah. It already has.
How long have you been doing it? Like, when did you start with them?
I'm in my second semester right now. We got a few more weeks. So yeah, we're literally right now we're doing etiology and ethics. So it's good.
How many people are in your kind of cohort?
It's weird because some are full time, some are part time.
I see.
So it's kind of variable.
Right.
So some will come in and some will go out.
Right.
But I'm in. I'm on part time is 2 classes. And I've got 2 colleagues that I'm also, and we're trying to stay on the same track, same classes. So we'll be together next semester as well. And we'll have our residency after the summer semester. So
I think it's a great resource for our field.
Absolutely.
Like the way that they make it easy for professionals that are working in treatment centers across the country. Can you speak to some of those benefits?
Yeah, well, first of all, I totally related with the imposter syndrome. Would seem like you kind of experienced because I only have a high school diploma.
Yep.
And so for me to go from a high school diploma, which I was not an honor student,
right?
I was a basketball player, and so when I went to junior college, community college, I always joke there I left with the master's in alcoholism. Is what I learned in junior college.
Yeah.
Right? So I dropped out of that to go sell yachts for my family, and make the money. And so at 44 now, going to grad school with a bunch of 22, 23, 24-year-olds fresh out of their undergrad, it's intimidating, But the good part for me is with my licensure that got me in the door, I have more experience. And so now the things that I'm learning are the things that I don't know. The models, the etiology, I just have started diving into the DSM-5 TR. So being able to learn how to diagnose people appropriately, it's going to be a total game changer. Bigger scope of practice. I can help. I really, because of my own mental health and trauma and obviously substance use, I get to help those people more specifically. Whereas right now it's kind of a no-go zone for me. I can't do harm because that's not my scope. So
something else that'll be exciting to think about, Jason, is it'll teach you, like a good program like that will teach you how to learn for life. So I've been out of school for 7 years. And like, think about the world today, 7 years, like so much has changed, everything that Cumberland Heights is doing now with artificial intelligence. Like I didn't go to school for that, like that wasn't, but school prepares you to know how to show up early and how to stay late and how to ask for help. And so I'm just thrilled for you, man. And just also because I know that y'all are you and your team, y'all are so gifted at helping people and putting your arms around them and loving them until they can love themselves, like that's what it's about. In these spaces and so just super, super excited about that process for you. I'm curious to shift gears about the new building and not to talk about, the paint color. It was a transition for our community.
Yeah.
Describe that however makes sense to you. Or do you want me to set the table about what happened, kind of? And
sure.
You can fill it in?
Yeah. Let's do that.
So for those that don't work at River Road every day, we launched a capital campaign a couple years ago to make some improvements at our headquarters, at our primary adult residential site. and one of those was our residential spaces. We had actually the first two buildings we ever built technically were the two cabins that we sought to replace. So we're 60 years old this year. They were 60 years old. And shout out to them. They served us well. Me, I stayed in one of those in cabin 300. Jay, our CEO, was a patient in one of those cabins. So there's like these two spaces that are like near and dear. So as you know, it was like a process. Like we had community events, in those buildings. And so, but we recognized that, it was 4 to a bathroom. Like we needed to invest in our community, and it added some flexibility in what we could do. So that's kind of setting the stage. And Jason's team, we opened kind of part one of that, which is approximately a 20,000 square foot, 40 bed building on our campus, like net new, with the clinical multi-use and community space connected to it. Whereas before we were kind of separated in different buildings. And so Jason was and is one of the primary counselors in that building, and shifting, from one day to the next, taking luggage, patients, moving hanging pictures and getting logged into the new computer, like from where you were before in Crichton.
Yeah, I was in the cabana.
Was a shift.
Yeah.
So just talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny, like in this last week, just thinking of all the different experiences. I was in the cabana for the majority of my role here. And so when I think of my clients, that's where most of them were, We've been in the new building now. Has it been like
3 months?
I was gonna say 3 months.
Yeah.
It still feels so, it's weird. I don't know if it's because I'm leaving, but it's like, I kind of minimize like how much work that I just done in that one space alone, because I've spent so much time in the cabana and now I'm leaving, but it is a beautiful building. I mean, the rooms that you guys built for the clients, they have more space. Before, like when I think of 300 and 400, you'd have 2 to a room and there would be no privacy. It was a bed over here, and then a Jack and Jill bathroom with the other room with those beds, And this one, they actually have their own stall and their own shower. The accommodations are just top notch.
Yeah.
It gives them more space to do their own studying. They have the little nooks. Our offices are now much more suitable for groups. The offices before, a 60-year-old building, I don't think they really even ever planned on having that many patients in those offices. Whereas now you can get 8 patients in an office and not feel so cramped. It was well done. Well done.
How do you think the patients took it?
I've gotten mixed results.
Isn't that interesting? I find it really interesting to hear about.
Yeah. I think initially in the first 2 months, I think we got a lot of kickback because the patients that were in that period of 2 months were familiar with the cabins. And so when they moved from the cabins to this, call it kind of more like a hotel feel, right?
Sure.
Because it's very, big hallways.
It's 60 years newer.
Yeah, it's new.
Like,
yeah.
There's no way to escape. There's a difference. And
yeah.
Yeah.
So, some of the people that are expecting the cabin feel, they get a little, whereas the people that don't know any different, they think it's amazing.
Sure.
It's beautiful.
Right.
They're proud to be. They don't want to be anywhere else.
Right.
So
take them down to the cabin. They'd say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Do you want this or do you want that? I want that.
Right.
I want the newest model.
Sure.
Right? Everybody does.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a shift for the campus too, like in terms of staffing and where people are. And
yes,
I really like that model though. But I don't do the groups here. Right. I like that y'all are in one zone, that you have what you need in that area, especially when the other phase 2, the women's is built, and then the men are going to shift into Hazel.
Yep.
And so that whole quad will become, especially with all that, think about what the additional clinical admin space that Hazel provides. So like Vivian and her workflow and her team, like it'll just be more seamless to do what needs to be done. And then, let's access the FLC or let's access Craig or whatever. And also for the women, to get that updated feel. Although Hazel was 2000.
Yeah, it's newer.
Oh, I wouldn't, 2005, maybe 2007. I don't remember off the top of my head. So
yeah, that was definitely not something we expected to the separation of the staff because we were all in Crichton before. And so when half of us moved down there, we weren't anticipating the detach, so that's been a little bit of a shift. But I mean, word is on the street that the new building's going to have, for the women's, is going to have downstairs clinical, upstairs patients. I think that will fit the clinicians and the patients better because that might provide them more of that one building feel, as opposed to over here, and then also having clinicians together because,
going from Colin's side to your side is kind of a walk.
It is.
Yeah.
And we feel disconnected.
Right. Right.
So I was happy to hear that was looked at for sure.
Well, part of that too is the footprint.
Yeah.
Because it's true. And the grade.
Yeah.
So
there was a lot of work for that 800 building for sure.
Yeah.
The house.
But I mean the footprint of the new one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because it's not as, it's in between 2 existing buildings, whereas the other one was wide open kind of field.
Yeah.
And so I too am excited, because that clinical, not to get so nerdy in these details, but that clinical space downstairs, will also be if it's after hours and clinical isn't here for whatever reason, that whole space can be closed off. Right. And then, but the community space is still accessible.
Yeah.
It's really an L.
Yeah.
But the same finishes throughout.
Nice.
To make it really just, a great improvement for the women as well.
Nice.
So, okay. Something else I'm curious about, and I ask tons of people, how have the patients changed? How has the presentation changed over your 5 years here? I'd be really interested to hear your perspective.
So it's funny you ask that because I have 2 different trains of thought.
Okay.
Clients have changed, but so has the approach. I think we're seeing a lot more mental health, that awareness.
Are we seeing more mental health, or are we measuring better?
Measuring better. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the answer.
I think we're measuring better.
You think so?
Yeah.
Like you think we're recognizing it better? We're talking about it better?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
And then I also think that the clinician's approach has become, some might say, on the pendulum of, old school, do this or you might die.
Right.
It's pivoted over to we're going to support you no matter what your ideas are. So I think the part that I don't ever want to lose, I'm a pretty black and white counselor. When I have a client that's struggling, I usually tell them up front, if I see a red flag for you, I'm going to tell you, and you might not like that. But it's my duty to let you know of this issue and for you to determine whether or not you're going to do anything with it. Because if you leave here and I don't help you identify this problem, then I'm failing you as a counselor. I'm going to give you the autonomy, the beneficence, and the non-maleficence of supporting you with this, and it's up to you whether or not you want to deal with it. Right? They might not do it in their first 30 days, and that's not the expectation. But so it's hard because you want to build a therapeutic alliance and you want them to have a good experience, but at the end of the day, we're really trying to save their lives. And a lot of them think they know what they need. And as a professional, it's like, I think you should work on this. Well, that's not what I'm going to work with right now. Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yep, I remember you bringing up memories.
The LADAC approach,
yep.
It's almost like a sponsor approach. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of LADAC, and I'm a LADAC. They're accused of being a licensed sponsor. Right. I'm like, that's not the case. We're educated too. And then there's like the LPC approach, and that's the Rogers. Yeah. That patient-centered approach. So I think there's a spectrum there we need to find.
I did both.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I was in Texas, it's called an LCDC.
Okay. Licensed clinical drug counselor. Yep.
Licensed chemical dependency counselor.
Okay. Yeah.
Which ages that licensed as. I was always fascinated by this because addiction is considered by some to be one of the most complicated mental health disorders in existence. Taking out severe mental illness. Mm-hmm. So dissociative identity disorder, which you're probably reading about now, multiple personalities, like let's set that aside for a second. Extreme bipolar 1, let's set that aside. But also addiction is very interesting because of the phenomenon of choice.
Yeah.
So let's hold that in one hand, that addiction is one of the more complicated mental illnesses to exist. Yet, in the other hand, it's the only diagnosis, disorder, disease, psychological, that you can get a license, a bachelor's level license to treat. Interesting. Now, as a person in recovery, as somebody who's gone down the path that you're going down right now, you start to uncover a little bit more information about why is that? And it's because our field has grown in parallel to that of psychology and our understanding of psychology. And so when this place was started, there was not licenses, right? In the 1960s. That's something that came later.
Yeah.
And so as the field grew in its professionalization, so too did the need to pragmatically solve the problem of wait a minute. There are people that have worked here for a long time, making this up, that are really skilled. They never went to school for it. They never read, a LADAC manual, right?
Yeah.
Or had a but they know how to stabilize. They know. So we need to have an accessible, tiered approach to that professional. See, that didn't happen with depression naturally, right? Because we didn't have, these treatment centers, these legacy providers around the country that were started to help alcoholic men. We didn't have any of that. So you see, it's really fascinating to me to think about how the history invited that. And now I think it's a strength. that our healthcare systems have that other disciplines don't have. I mean, we have this, we talked about it earlier, like the multidisciplinary, diversity is our strength.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity of experience and posture and perspective
Mm-hmm.
is 100. Because if you think that you're going to get in recovery and not be challenged, by God, I'm not saying like people are going to confront you in a meeting. That's not what I mean. But like life's going to come at you.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of my favorite lines in the basic text is everything is subject to revision, especially what we know about the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Just like never, like, oh, I remember, okay, I'm going to be on this path of like Groundhog Day, like getting these lessons. So I think that it's important to remember how those skills that you're talking about are just as valuable as the master's level LPC, Rogers, EFT, CBT.
Mm-hmm.
It's 2 arrows in the quiver.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, we need everybody. We need people that are not in recovery, that have a master's degree, that are called to this work. We need people that are just LADACs. We need people that don't have any of that, that might be on the milieu team. Yeah. And then we need people like you, Jason, who have both experiences and we need all of that.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes, because I remember our LADAC staff can have a chip on it, a little chip about like, having feelings about, should I do this or should I not? Should I get a master's degree? Should I not? And so, but I think that organizationally, that's how we think about it. Yeah. It's like we actually need everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's where I think Cumberland Heights, because if it wasn't for Cumberland Heights, I would not have grown as much as I have. And I also wouldn't be doing my master's program right now either. Wouldn't have been a thing.
Yeah, Vivian told me, she was like, we kind of kicked Jason in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like kind of, tell me about that. When did that happen? And did you fight it?
So it was another God shot moment for me. I was talking to a peer that I absolutely love, and she's recently an LPC MHSP as well. And we were talking in my office one morning, and you get to a certain point with the company where you feel you've hit the ceiling. And I'm, the realization of self and where I'm at, I have to try and be honest with where I'm at, part of my recovery.
Okay.
And I was realizing that I was hitting my glass ceiling because with the LADAC, I couldn't do much more. I couldn't do much more private practice. There's definitely probably not going to be a large set of management opportunities available. I'm seeing where the trend is with that, with education and
of course.
So
it's a total door opener.
Yeah,
for good reason.
So I was looking at other careers. I was actually looking at a career change.
Really?
Yeah. And I was talking to my coworker, and she's like, "Well, what about going back to school?" And I'm like, "I have a high school diploma.
Yeah.
And I'm 44 years old, with 2 girls, 3 and 5, and a mortgage. Like, I don't have the time or the ability to go back to school for 8 to 10 years."
Yeah, or the energy. Yeah.
The energy, yeah, right. And she's like, "Man, you would be great." She said, "If with your skill set and your approach, if you got you an education, you'd be unstoppable." And I'm like, I've been thinking about this for months, and that's how the conversation got to. And I kid you not, Nick, I get back to my desk, I log in, and an email comes from one of our previous HR people that says that Hazelden Betty Ford is going to be on campus in 2 weeks talking about their graduate program. and I just didn't think anything of it until I looked at the bottom, and it says they have a pathway for those that don't have the undergrad but have the licensure and the experience to admit.
Shout out to HR.
Shout out to HR
for making sure that they put that piece.
Yes. So when you do it, when you post it again, make sure you add that again.
Bold.
But it's also Hazelden's. Obviously, we love Hazelden.
Yeah.
We
We can trace our history straight back to Hazelden.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Minnesota model, right? I will not stop promoting it to my peers.
Of
So if
course.
anybody else needs help, I'm going to give them a shout out. I'm going to point them to there. But it was just another one of those gotcha moments. And I remember going back to my wife. I forwarded the email to my wife saying, "Oh my God, shout out." And like, I've already signed up. And so I think it was like 3 weeks from the time the email came to the time like it was in, and I went in there with my notepad and everything, and it was another seamless thing.
Oh man, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, just hard to say no. Wait, this.
Yeah.
This.
Yeah. And then like another thing that's recently occurred that is a combination of shout out to Cumberland, but also to Tennessee is the we are in a treatment, and NAATP I think is who provides the no I'm getting them mixed up. Tatis. I'm sorry. They have a scholarship, and I've been approved for it. So as a non-FAFSA, eligible student,
Let's go.
I got the support from the state
OAC funded, right? So which
program,
comes from our Tennessee Alcohol and Drug Counselor Trade Organization, TADIS, right, received funds from the state, which came from the settlements related to the OxyContin epidemic, and has decided to distribute a portion of those funds through this cool program, which puts money in the pockets of people that are going to school to become alcohol and drug counselors, or anything in the psychology field broadly. Yeah,
it's I think it's
super cool.
Yeah, I think it's mostly for LPCs, but it might be for LADACs. I'm not sure. I'm just another blessing, because the financial part being out of pocket, no scholarships available, huge blessing. Huge. So I once again
life change. I mean, it's a big deal. What makes me really happy about that too is like Tennessee making it, like putting the money in the pockets of people, like truly changing the trajectory of their life and making something accessible that otherwise wasn't.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And education being one of those is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the tuition is. You don't have to tell me at Hazelden, but it's not nothing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that's so great, man.
Yeah. And the amazing part is because, I'm basically skipping my undergrad and paying for a master's. So the tuition rate is very reasonable when you really look at it that way.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
You're kind of getting it all in a little bit. That's really the unique thing about what they do is they recognize that there's this need, right?
Yep.
And they have figured it out through their own graduate program and the Department of Education and however it is that they apply for that.
KCREP approved, which is the big part,
Yep, and CHIA and they've solved a problem, and now you're one of many that are just benefiting from that. I'm so excited for you, Jason.
Yeah,
I'm so excited. Well, we're gonna miss you, man.
Yeah,
you're still here.
Yeah,
but the River Road crew is a unique crew.
Absolutely.
Stillwaters has a little bit of that. Yeah. Arch Academy has a little bit of that. IOP has a little bit of that.
I got to meet the IOP team yesterday.
How was that?
I want to give them a shout out. Like, they are a bunch of amazing, energetic, passionate people. And
Dr. Lewis.
Yeah, she's awesome. I've never met her before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Of course, a shout out to Cindy, who's there for her retirement and
retiring after
19 years.
19 years. Yeah.
It's weird because, I'd been talking to her about a position in IOP. I could never do PM because of my girls, and so it's really interesting that the day I'm like transferring, the day she's leaving, it's just weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
But looking forward to. I'm not saying goodbye to people here. I'm saying see you later.
Of course.
I'm going to come back for some alumni stuff. I'll be here for trainings. I'm just in a different spot, and maybe one day I'll come back and wear a bigger pair of shoes.
We'd love that.
That's kind of my long-term approach. So
we'd love that. God has a plan.
Absolutely. He's been very apparent in my life.
These things tend to unfold, like you talked about all day today.
More will be revealed.
More. What do you know? Okay, last question. What do you think our biggest strength is? And if you could change one thing about this place, this organization, what would it be?
It's a shame we have an hour. But I'm really glad you didn't start with that question. Okay, so the number one thing about this place is the legacy and the reputation. That's why people fly all over the world to come here. We have a history. The same reason why people go to Hazelden Betty Ford.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I got the job in California, I told a tech staff that I was leaving. I was getting a new job, and I told them where I was working. They're like, "How did you get a job at Cumberland Heights?" They were amazed. It's got a reputation because of what it's done. So I would say that's probably the answer to your first question.
Okay.
The second one, what I would change, or I would keep some of the old school values and morals. I would definitely try and focus a lot on, you know, the first 30 days on residential campus, you're not going to get a whole lot of trauma, mental health stuff done. We're clearing the webs. And I think that comparing when I first started to now, I think the approach of CAs and of counselors has changed. Some for the better, but some for the worst. You know, I think that I don't want to see Cumberland Heights mimic anybody else, because Cumberland Heights already has something that nobody else has to offer. And I know that there's a lot of appealing boutiques. Let them be boutiques. Let them do their thing. But I think we try a little bit too hard to be like that, and that's not in our DNA. Keep the blood the way it is. It's been successful for 60 years. You know, one easy thing I can point out is the tablets. Bigger problem than it's worth. You know,
those IT guys.
I love IT. They save our butts. But
I'm giving myself a hard time.
Well, I apologize if that was your call.
No. Oh, no, nothing is my call. It's our call. I think that there is some validity and truth to what you're talking about. There is some awareness and discussion. Look, I'm an alumnus.
Yeah.
And a person in recovery. That doesn't mean that I care more or less than you. But there is discussion that I'm happy exists, which is, how do we balance our tradition, the wisdom that comes with experience, with change, and growth. I mean, in some ways, it's how do we as individuals practice the program that we preach? How do we inject those values and those principles into the organization in a way for it to remain healthy? I mean, anytime you get a group of people together, let alone majority of us being alcoholics and addicts, you're going to have a little bit of drama. You're going to have a little bit of conflict. But by and large, I think this is a very healthy organization.
Oh, yeah.
And I, based on my experience here as a team member, I think that those discussions and conversations are ongoing, and I know are close to the hearts of all of our team members, which is just, hey, how do we continue to balance, you know? And I don't think we'll ever lose that balance, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think it's the same thing as the approach.
Yeah,
is that
sure.
We have to evolve, like with the mental health part.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't think we need to evolve as much as...
Like this, who we were 60 years ago would be shocking and likely scary for a staff member, just like it would be 70s to 90s. You know, like, interestingly enough, you know, like one of our teams down here, you know, we're rewriting and updating the history book. And so I've been like, And I don't recommend that project because it's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
To try to get it right.
Yeah.
To try to protect not so much the legacy of the legacy of the people.
Yeah.
That gave so much, and how do we make sure that we protect those stories, whether it's the person, one of the people that founded the family program and gave us our gate in her will, whether that's the person that gave us our logo in the chapel bell that was over 100 years old when it was installed on campus 25 years ago. And I'm just with you. I love that part of us. At the same time, how does Cumberland Heights make sure that we don't become legends in our own mind?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a little dangerous.
Yeah.
So,
I think,
but we need your help to do that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, I appreciate you asking me that question, because I think ultimately part of that, keeping that DNA is keeping the management, like, I think involving counselors and CAs a little bit more might be helpful.
Yeah.
Because there's blind spots. Everybody has blind spots.
Yeah, totally.
But sometimes some decisions are made and it's like, if we only had an opportunity to let them know what that problem might cause, like the cogs in the wheel, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
And you know what? It's funny because when I think of the problems that Cumberland Heights has, I can't help but remind myself all the good things it does too.
Yeah.
This place does a lot of amazing work,
Yeah.
and there's problems in every treatment center, so.
I say that all the time, like, hey, if every patient is doing, every human being that's coming here to try to change is following every policy and behaving perfectly, something's wrong. Check the water.
Yeah.
We should expect, we should expect things not to go according to plan, or people to not know, Jason, like, I have trouble sometimes not losing patience because I got a flat tire at a really inconvenient time,
Yeah.
So like, it's ironic sometimes that that's something else we should battle against, is like how we can come down hard on, I can't believe, they're doing this. And it's like, yeah. And last week, they were shooting heroin, like maybe we should reframe, a little bit of how we're thinking about that. Look, good luck.
Thank you.
Right. I think I'm so pumped that we got to have this conversation.
I am too. Thank you very much.
At the right time.
Yeah.
And good luck to you. And, we'll be talking and all of that, but just so grateful for your time on this day.
Yeah. I'm also, I want to say that, as a staff member, I really appreciate it because I too observe people. And I've seen you on campus, and I've seen you around, and I've seen you in the meetings, and I'm very hopeful with what we're moving forward with Cumberland Heights, and especially like your role.
Cool, man. Thank you.
So I feel like we do have. I think Cumberland Heights has a good future ahead of itself.
That's kind.
And if I thought otherwise, I wouldn't be staying with the company.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man.
So
I
thank you for
that.
letting me meet you and talk to you, and
Yeah. Likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, follow, or share. We appreciate y'all. See you next time.